think here in the front.
So trade protectionism, particularly in the EU and the US, cost developing nations billions of dollars every year. And even Australia has over 800 tariffs. So in the Doha round, trade protectionism has been slammed. But even after the World Trade Organization banned it, agricultural economies, in particular after the GFC, are still being subsidized heavily. So clearly, the abolition of this would help developing countries, but how can we pressure the world's biggest economies to do it?
Harriet?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm really glad you brought it up, because I think that does go to what's the framework and the policy framework within which countries can tackle poverty. And I do think it is one of the biggest scandals that the developed world just walked away from the Doha round of World Trade Talks, having said we will make the test of these talks development first and last, and then just washed their hands of it and failed to bring it to a conclusion. And it is now 10 years, if we're talking anniversaries, it's now 10 years since those talks began, and it's absolutely critical we bring it to conclusion. And one of the most iniquitous examples is actually around cotton, where it's been directly proven by everyone from the World Bank onwards that the subsidies that the EU and the US give to their cotton farmers, they then grow too much cotton, they dump it on world markets, and it pulls down the price to cotton farmers in West Africa, so that a country like Mali, only 4 out of 10 kids can go to school, because 40% of Mali's income earning is from cotton, and they just can't earn anything for their cotton because of US subsidies going to, and when we say cotton farmers in the US, in one case, one farmer alone received £24 million in subsidies. So I think farmer is kind of taking a little far. We're talking fairly significant agribusiness here. And very commonly, it's about £1 million per person per year, whereas the average cotton farmer in Mali is getting about $1 per farmer per day, sorry, living on less than $1 a day. So it's absolutely critical that we take action. And if they can't get the whole deal sorted, then they have to tackle the most iniquitous examples of subsidies and unfair trade barriers, of which cotton must be one of the first. And the second principle must be looking at what most impacts for the least developed and the poorest countries in the world. And I think what we can do is, obviously, we can put pressure on our governments. I think that's the most important thing that we can do, is writing to governments, putting pressure on them to take action and show leadership. I think the business community can really help, and many members of the business community do really support a fairer trade deal. And I think, obviously, their weight at the table can add to the voice of the public. And I actually also think something like the success of fair trade is a very powerful signal to government to say, look, the ordinary members of the public are ready to put their money where their mouth is. They're ready, even in the teeth of a recession, to go on spending more. So they clearly believe in trade justice, and that's giving governments a mandate to really take those bold actions that they need to. And I did just want to also make one other point, going back to the earlier conversation when we were talking about assumptions. And I think, in Britain, if you get to be 100, you can assume you're going to get a telegram from the Queen. So I hope, Andrew, that you tomorrow are going to get that happy birthday telegram.
I hope so.
Did anyone else want to respond to that question? That was fine. Now, if you can indicate, I know we've got a question over there, but also after that question, indicate and we'll get the microphone to you. And please welcome Tim Costello, who's still got a smile on his face after the... We're glad to see you, Tim.
Thank you.
But if we can go to this question over here. Yeah.
Hi, I've got hundreds of questions I want to ask. I'll try and limit myself. On issues of sustainability, we know enough about the science, we know enough about the social justice imperative, we know about the technology, we even know the policies. What's really missing is what we've been discussing here is leadership, particularly in Australia. I think we're sadly missing this both in our business leaders and in our political leaders. My question firstly is directed to Rob. How do we generate that leadership? How do we push and cajole our so-called business leaders into having the same aha moment that your CEO had? And related to that, it's both to Rob and to, Andrew, leadership on climate change. It's one of the key things that this country can do to help not only ourselves but developing countries, where are our business leaders on pushing for a real price on carbon, not just the $10 that the BCA is putting up, but actually something closer to the $40 which we think we need? Where are they? They seem to be outnumbered 10 to 1, by the coal lobbyists that are running around Parliament House.
Let me start by addressing the second part of the question first. I happen to think that the climate change debate has in some way hijacked the wider environmental debate. Clearly it is a very central part of the problem, but it gives the scope for deniers to do nothing about anything. And I think what we need to do to encourage more leadership here is to talk more about the wider issue, which is that the Earth doesn't have the overall carrying capacity to support the way that we consume and produce. That is the fundamental problem, and the carbon issue fits within that. And I think if you can create a debate at that level, it is then possible to talk to business leaders in a language that they can understand. I think we've been trying for some time to appeal to their better interests. And I think what is required is an ability to sell the business case, because there is a fundamentally sound business case here. And that's something that is not being communicated, that is not being delivered. So that is talking in their own language. And I think if we can do a much better job to demonstrate the business case, you can ensure that the issue becomes central to the business, not just something else that I've got to do during my week. The problem with CSR is that it's sometimes the better window dressing that kind of fits over to one side. We have to move that, and this has to become the way that we do business, and that needs a business case.
Andrew, did you?
The first question you asked was, how do we get leadership? And I think we've just got to expect it, and we've got to use all the tools that we can. I mean, I've been here this week, and we've been addressed by a number of ministers and the opposition, and one of the topics that they've said almost consistently is, it's quite difficult to have a debate on a complex topic like the carbon regime and the carbon price when, and they've measured it, because I said we're quantitative, they've measured it. The amount of time that, each item and each soundbite is shorter and shorter and shorter every single year, and it's now down to 7 seconds. And it's easy to say it's a big new tax than it is to explain why you should have a price on carbon in 7 seconds, right? It's obvious. And go back to that point about the pay media and the earn media. I think it's just, well, it could be a generational thing, but there is better tools today to get that message out than there has ever been in any time before today, and we should use it. So we should expect leadership, and we should all be using all the tools, and they're available to everyone, they're freely available, and we should use them like crazy. On the point on the carbon, I don't know whether 10 or 40 is the right one. I do personally, this is my own view, I support a market-based mechanism that will address the issue, because this point that was raised earlier about there's been costs in doing business that haven't been acknowledged, that haven't been aware of, haven't been accounted for in the whole equation, have to be there. And all I can say is the good news, bad news is news, good news really isn't news, and it's very, very difficult. And I know from our own support of the NBN, for example, it's very, very difficult to get yourself in a position where you can actively support something that is the biggest infrastructure project, and I think will be the most significant project that this country has ever done. And I would say, if you look at the outside view of what we're doing, you'll see the same. I think our carbon regime will be the same, but I don't know if it's 10 or 40. I really don't know. I think a market mechanism is important, and we do have to take account of it, and also we have the total equation. The other thing is always, like the NBN, I'm sure there's as much opportunity as there is downside risk in a carbon price, and like there is in ubiquitous broadband. Any change has as much upside as downside, and we've got to find the upside in the carbon price like we do in broadband.